So welcome to class number 4, methods. I know in the last class, if you're following in order, I said that we're going to do arrays, but looking at my notes and the fact that I've taught this type of class many times before, usually after loops and repeating structures, we do methods. So I figured my notes and the books probably know better than what I know. So we're going to do methods and we'll do static arrays next week. So for today's class, basically what we're going to go over is basically define what a method is, and then find what a parameter is, and we'll go into how to put parameters into methods, and then we will go into how to use return values with methods. This class, as far as content and vocabulary goes, is pretty small, but it is. We'll have a little bit longer coding. I'll give you a few examples of how to make methods and explain what those functions are and stuff like that. So basically methods are predefined segments of code. So you notice when we call the previous classes system.out.println, that's a method. Basically it runs something kind of predefined and kind of prized applications. And basically methods are made to make the program more modular, so you can cut and you need to do something a few times, and usually you'll have that a lot. So cutting and pasting it, you call a method and it'll run it for you. And then, so we haven't talked about this yet, but variables have scopes, which basically means when you declare something in between the braces, those curly braces, once you leave those braces, the variable is no longer usable. And so what we're going to do is we'll declare variables within methods to kind of manipulate them, but once you leave that method, those values for those variables disappear. That's called scope. And you may think, okay, if you haven't programmed before, you think, oh, this is kind of annoying. But it's really good to help you, so you kind of keep stuff small, and overriding stuff. So you want to keep variables as local as possible. And then kind of a rule of thumb, I kind of added this as the last minute when I was putting these slides together. It's kind of a best practice. If you have to cut and paste something 3 or more times, like a few lines, make a method that will actually do that for you. So for this first methods example, I first need to build kind of our program infrastructure. So I'm going to make a new package. I right click on source/main, so the package holder, but you can also do this if you go into source and right click in here, you can make a new package. Or any of the package ones, you can make a new package. Source things. So I'm going to go to new and then package, and I'll do one called methods lesson, and then hit finish, and this should create a package. You know there's nothing in it when in Eclipse when the package is empty. And then do new, and I want to make another package. I want to make new class. The class here, I'm going to call this just methods. I'm going to leave all this information the same for, and I'm going to select main, so it makes a main function. And so you can see this. I'll hit finish. So now I have a main function. And I will call this author Greg. And create this. So in this case, the main method is it's a method. And what we want to do is build a method that calls something else in here. This method is going to call something else. So for this program, what we're going to do is, and a lot of books do this for their methods example, is just generate random numbers. So you notice the book that I have in my resources, this is what they do for their methods example, and I liked it. So in Java, if you want to we need to bring in the method class. And so to do that, there's a built-in class. If we do java.util for utilities .random, you get a class that you can generate random numbers in. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make a new method. And so for methods that aren't part of a class, we'll talk about this later when we go into object-oriented programming, but basically for basic methods, we want to do public, which means it's outside. Static means it's not really dependent on the class, which in this case is methods. And we'll get into that later when we cover the class section. And then we're going to have no return value, and I'm going to call this random 1. So the void is the return value, which we'll talk about in example 3. And then you want to give the function a name, so random 1. Oops. And then I'm not going to pass any parameters to this. So now I've created a function, and I'm going to set it up, and so I'm going to describe this as a basic random function. And so what the random class does, and let me change this, a function should have a lowercase r. So what this function is going to do is just print out a random number. So if you do, so I'm going to declare a variable. I'm going to call this random. I'll call it rand equals new random. So what this is doing is it's allocating memory into rand. So for when you so you see the uppercase letter here means it's a class, and when you allocate, instead of just doing like with the normal like primitive types like integer and type, if you just do a random, if you don't, I mean if you just put a value in there, you don't need to do that. It'll just find it for you. But when you initialize, also called define a value for a class, you generally have to put the new. You have to do new, which basically allocates memory for it. And so I'm going to say system.out.println rand next int, and for the bound I'm just going to put 100. Now I typed 100 in here, and this is actually bad programming practice. You don't usually want to put random numbers generally directly into a function. But you notice here, I actually have a lot of functions I'm calling. I'm calling in the systems class, I'm calling system.out.println, and then I'm also doing random, and then I'm doing this bound, so I'm calling two functions in this case. I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to do int max val equals 100, and then I'm going to put max val in here, and I'll save this. And so now what I need to do in my main class is call this value. So I'm going to do call random 1, and since there's no values being passed in here, I leave this the same. I'm going to save it, and then now, like I usually have to do, so I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So I'm going to if I right click on this, oops, you really can't see it, so I'll do it in here. Bring here, I'm going to launch a new configuration, run, double click Java application, method lesson dot methods. I'll just call this rand methods. And then I'm going to hit enter. There's actually, you can't see it off screen, but there's a finish button as well. So I've rand methods is up here, and then I'm going to run this. Oops. I need to methods lesson, so I need to fix this real quick. Call this methods lesson. Try running it again. Writes a value 31. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and then so I'll say system. But while I'm typing this out, I just want to say that we'll get into a little bit more depth into this stuff here in a little bit. So what I'll do this is I'll copy and paste this 3 times, and then run it. And then notice how you get three different sets of numbers. So 3 random numbers between 0 and 100, exclusive. So it's actually 0 and 99. And so now that we've seen like kind of a basic method that kind of just does stuff, I wanted to go over how to get parameters. So you pass this basically gives values from the parent method, the one that you're calling it in, and pass those values in there. Again, think of system.out.println, where the text that's getting printed to the screen, that is a parameter. It's a value you're passing in. And so you can, basically, there's really no limit on the number of parameters you can pass into a method. And I'll show you an example here in a second how you define those. But kind of just give you an idea. Parameters are the values that you give to the method. And in Java, parameters are what's called pass by value. And that basically means is when you pass that value into the, for the most part, kind of things get kind of funny with arrays, but when you pass that value, pass that variable into a method, it actually just gives the value. It doesn't actually give the whole variable. So you can change that parameter value within the method, and outside the method on the parent method, it won't modify it. And then now to show what parameters are, I'm going to make another, just so you guys can see it in the changes in, when you look at the get code, I'll say another basic random function. Actually, I'm going to erase this and I'll show you a little trick for document stuff. So I'm going to do public static, I'll call this void, I'll call this random2. And then now I'm still at the void, so I'm not going to pass any values. But now I'm going to add some parameters. So I'm going to add a lower and upper bound. So I'm going to call this int. I'll just call this int min for minimum, and then int max for maximum. And then I'm going to get the random number again. So I'll do random rand equals new random. And then I'll print out. So instead of just do the print out, actually, let me just kind of, I want to do some equations. So I'll solve this. Int random num equals, so I'm going to do the minimum number, so it can't be less than, so I'm going to do rand.next int, and so the random number needs to be the min number plus the max number, and then I'm going to do plus min. Or is that right? So I say I'll do max minus min, so make the limit plus min, and this will give you a range between the two numbers. And then so I want to print this out, so I'll do system dot out dot print line. I'll call this random number 2 plus rand, and then random number. And then what I was saying before is if you do the /3 dots and enter, I'll just kind of fill this out for you, and I'll say my description is generate a random number between min and max. So the min number is always going to be 0. So for this case, I'm going to do random 2, and I'll do 1 and 10 for my min and max. Random 2, and I'll do 1 and 10. And so practice what I preach. I'm going to make 2 variables. So I'll do int min equals 1, int max equals 10. And so notice here how the min and max numbers match these. Since these are what's called a different scope, so the min here is different than the max here. I'll cut and paste this here so you guys can see this. You see the scope in here, so this min value is going to be different than this min value in here. So let me cut and paste this. Put them in here. Type that in, and then now when I run this, Let's see what did I do wrong. Let's see what I do wrong here. Well, let's look at actually a good example. So if I wanted to do debugging, change this to the debugger, and run this one. So I have the random number. So 1. So we can actually see what this value is here. Copy and then paste this in expression. So 0. And the min is 1. I'll do a step over. See the random number is 4. Oh, because I have a 2 there. Let me put a space in there. Dumb me. And then run through it. And let me run this one more time. You can see 4 and 6. So these numbers seem to make sense. I was wondering why it was 24, but it was because I had the 2 there and I didn't put it. And then finally, now that we pass values in and manipulate them, we can also show you that you can return the value. You have a return value, so you pass the value out. That's what's called a method output. And basically, when you want to pass a value out, you put the whatever variable or number you have, you put the keyword return in front of it, no parentheses in front of it, and when you call return, you'll leave that function, and then the value that's associated with that return value will be passed out. And I'll show you how to declare that stuff in an example here in a second. And if you just put return, also if you just put return in a method, and it hits that line, and there's no, and you say you're not returning any values, like it's a void function, like I showed in the previous 2 examples, it just basically just exits that function. And finally, so one thing about Java is if you do actually have set a return value, all possible paths, so if you have any if statements or kind of loops or whatever, all possible paths have to return a value, otherwise you'll get an error when you run the program. And then so finally, our last portion is going to be, we're going to put it all together. So for the first example, I just kind of did a basic method. The second example, I did a method with parameters. And the third one, what I'm going to do, put them all together. So I'll do public, static, so still public and static are the same. Now this next one's going to be your return value. So I'm going to do integer, and I'm going to call this random3. And I'll still do the int min, int max. And then now I need to have a return value, otherwise I'll get an error. So what I'm going to do is I like to do is I'll do int random number, and I'll make this equal to 0 just to initialize it. And then I'm going to do return random num. And so now this error should go away, and you'll see that this value is the integer, is going to get passed out. And I'll show you how that works here in a second. And then I'm just going to do the same thing here. So I'll do, as I did before, I'll do random. Let me move this to the top here, and I'll kind of start combining a few things. So random rand equals new random. So random num equals 0. And then I'll change this to the same one we had down here. I'll just cut and paste this. And then I can put the value return random number. Now notice here, so this is actually do the same thing. I could actually put random3 in for this position, and it wouldn't change the function, but just so you can kind of see all things put together. And so now what I'll do is int, I'll call this rand1 equals random3 min max, int rand2 random 3 min max, and then finally print these values out. So do system dot out dot print line rand1 equals rand1. Now cut and paste this. Rand2 equals rand2, and then I'll run this. So get out of debug mode, run it, and you can see all the outputs here. So I'll be posting the code on the GitHub, which I'll have the link below this video. And I have links to the website if you want to get a little more information about methods. And then if you want to support this website, click the buy books through Amazon through the links below, or anything else through Amazon. And I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel.